New discoveries are revolutionizing our understanding of how the American West was made. Incredible megafloods, massive volcanic eruptions, and landscapes that bear uncanny parallels with Mars. Revelations that allow us to glimpse the fate of the Earth. The American West exists as much in our collective imagination as it does in the stark red rocks, surging canyons, and dusty plains of the land itself. Today, recent discoveries provide us with new answers and new questions about the ancient and mysterious forces that shape these landscapes. They reveal unknown processes of change and the forgotten power of natural catastrophe. Geologist Vic Baker is exploring one of the greatest scientific debates of the last century. The controversy focuses on a remote region that stretches from Montana through Washington State and into Oregon. It was named by early 20th century farmers as the Scablands.
It appeared to them that some tremendous force had ripped the skin of the earth where they could grow their crops off of the landscape and exposed the black rock, looking like the earth had been wounded, and hence they gave this rock the name Scabland.
When geologists began investigating these scab-like features in the 1920s, they soon discovered they were just one part of a much bigger mystery. Vic journeys to Ephrata, Washington to investigate one of these features. A gigantic boulder sits in a field surrounded by other smaller boulders scattered throughout the area.
I just chipped this rock sample off a giant boulder. The rock type is not the rock from right in the vicinity. It came from somewhere else. And so the big mystery is, how did it get here?
The nearest source of basalt rock is more than 30 miles away. So how did it get here? One theory was a glacier scooped up the boulder and surrounding rocks during the last ice age. As the glacier gouged its way south, it dragged the encased rocks miles from their original locations. But the North American ice sheet only made its way as far south as northern Montana. Another theory proposed that an erupting volcano threw these rocks here. But the nearest volcanoes are hundreds of miles away, far out of range. About 20 miles north of the Ephrata boulder are huge potholes, some more than 60 feet deep.
They look like they were just drilled down into the rock. The problem is what kind of force was able to do this into solid basalt bedrock.
The potholes lie a few miles south of a gigantic cliff wall called the Dry Falls. These cliffs are nearly 400 feet high and stretch for 3.5 miles. They're so big that they could fit 5 Niagara Falls within them. Today, the lakes at the bottom of the Dry Falls are the result of rainwater. What force could have created this unique landscape? Geologist Paul Carling of the University of Southampton studies how water can create features like the Dry Falls. Together with fellow geologist Julian Leland, Paul has devised an experiment using different layers of gravel and rock to test if a sudden release of water can create a landscape like the channeled scablands.
Through experimentation using flumes and water tanks, we can clearly see erosional features that can only be formed by a fluid like water.
The floodwaters sweep the ground soil off the underlying rock, creating the distinctive exposed scabs. And miniature boulders are swept downstream, far from their original locations. Near the outburst, the flow strips away all the soil, exposing the light-colored rock beneath. Just like the Dry Falls. The experiment confirms that the scablands and the Dry Falls were both created by a colossal torrent of water.
It's clear that the Dry Falls that we see today was created by running water. And it was probably generated very rapidly, at most a couple of days.
But where the water came from is still a mystery. A similar phenomenon is under investigation on another landscape that bears a resemblance to the scablands, Mars.
Start 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of the Delta II rocket with Phoenix.
In 2007, a Delta II rocket blasted off from Cape Canaveral to the Red Planet and released the Phoenix lander. Its exploration of Mars has helped reveal similarities between the channeled scablands and much of the Martian surface. "190 miles above the Phoenix lander orbits the satellite HiRISE. Since 2006, it's been photographing the Martian surface and has revealed dry falls even bigger than those on Earth.
The images are showing cataracts so similar to what we see behind me that if you didn't know you were looking at pictures of Mars, you would think you were looking at aerial photographs of the channeled scabland.
It's possible water once flowed over the surface of Mars. But just like the scablands, it's a mystery where the water came from. This puzzled scientists well into the 20th century. Yet it seems America's earliest inhabitants already knew the answer.
My community, the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma, I believe that we have some oral traditions that can only be explained in historical terms by what happened in the Scablands region.
The Scablands are just one example of a landscape created by a mysterious natural catastrophe. But it's not the only place where a force of nature helped shape the American West. New discoveries are changing our understanding of how the American West was formed. Deep in the Rocky Mountains lie the secrets of a cataclysmic event that took place beyond human comprehension. The Rockies stretch 3,000 miles from Canada to New Mexico. Within them are the San Juan Mountains in southwestern Colorado. 28 million years ago, the San Juans were the epicenter of an immense natural catastrophe that, until recently, had completely escaped human detection. The San Juan Mountains are unusually high and steep. Clues to their origin were uncovered here in the 1880s and spawned the mining town of Creede. Today, the mines are closed, and the only townsfolk to venture into them are the rockhounds, people obsessed with collecting minerals.
I've been rock hounding since I was in diapers. My mom tells me about finding rocks in my pockets as a little kid.
The lure of the mines just gets in your blood, you know, the crystals, and you want to go see what's a little further around the corner. Up the way, there's 4, 5, 6, 8 more major shafts with parts of old ore houses. There were just dozens of them around here because the vein's over 7 miles long, and they came in and poked holes on every piece of it they could to try to make a living.
Unknowingly, the early miners who worked these long, rich seams of silver and minerals were extracting vital clues. How these minerals formed is key to solving the mystery of what shaped the mountains we see today.
The groundwater seeped down to the lower levels and became superheated and dissolved the minerals, and then as the water percolated up higher, it cooled. And when that cooled, the minerals settled out on the sides of the cracks that the water was in, and that created a vein, and that created the minerals.
Superheated water is the catalyst that created Creede's mineral riches. But what heats the water? Volcanism. Evidence of volcanic activity that once took place around Creede is here at Wagon Wheel Gap. The gap is a 2,500-foot thick wall of volcanic rock called dacite. Like Creede's minerals, dacite originated in a vast magma chamber beneath the San Juan region. The magma chamber also created volcanic rock called tuff. Within the tuff is the final clue identifying the catastrophic event that transformed the San Juans from low-lying mountains into high peaks.
I've just collected the sample of volcanic rock. It's a rock that I recognize very well. It's a solidified volcanic ash that goes for as much as 50 or 75 miles in every direction out from the San Juan Mountains, and is the largest tuff sheet in the San Juan Mountains.
The tuff sheet extends like a boundary wall, with a circumference of more than 450 miles surrounding almost the entire San Juan region. How this volcanic rock originated has long since been a mystery.
It's like doing a jigsaw puzzle. When somebody's thrown away half the pieces and you have to figure out what the picture looks like with only part of the pieces left.
In the 1960s, geologists assumed the tuff was formed over millions of years by numerous small volcanoes. And only by improvements in dating has the truth become clear. By measuring how uranium and lead decay over time, it's been possible to precisely date the tuff.
Now they can date a volcanic rock like this one I'm sitting on at 28.02 million years, plus or minus about 0.02, plus or minus about 20,000 years. To me, that's just amazing.
The tuff's age can only mean one thing. 28 million years ago, an eruption tore through the San Juan Mountains with more explosive force than any other known in the history of the world. Today, the ancient 1,000 square mile volcanic crater, the caldera, is almost invisible. Far as the eye can see, this section is only part of the caldera.
We have a wonderful view, the best view that exists, of the northern end of what probably is the world's largest caldera, the La Garita caldera. From the north rim where we are, we see in the very far distance, the snow-covered peaks are the uplifted floor of the northern third of the caldera. We're probably seeing about 12 miles of a caldera that's 50 miles across.
The debris from this massive eruption coated the San Juan Mountains, increasing their volume by 1/10 and their height by about 1,000 feet. By comparing La Garita to more recent eruptions, we get a real sense of just how much material was hurled into the atmosphere.
I was at Mount St. Helens in 1980, and imagine the deposits from Mount St. Helens being in this espresso cup. Then visualize La Garita. Its deposits would fit in this 55-gallon oil drum, 5,000 times as much as came from Mount St. Helens.
La Garita was probably the most destructive natural event in the history of the American West. But no one realized the role volcanism played in shaping the West's most famous landmark. Until now. The more we learn about how the American West was made, the more we uncover overlooked catastrophic forces. For some, the 277-mile-long Grand Canyon is geology's grandest mystery, a place that refuses to release its secrets.
The canyon, in some ways, eats its own evidence. It destroys the evidence of its beginning in the process of erosion.
It's a place whose familiarity is deeply deceptive.
What you have is a partial record of events that have occurred over millions of years. And it's very difficult to put that story back together. It's a great detective story when you only have part of the evidence.
New findings suggest the Grand Canyon is both much younger and much older than the 6 million years many believe it took the Colorado River to carve it. It was a sacred place to the local Hopi people. Their ancestors climbed up a ladder to the canyon floor to escape the destruction of an earlier world. More than 200 feet below the surface of the western rim are the Grand Canyon Caverns. Home to a rich variety of minerals, these caves have become the focus of a controversial new theory about the age of the canyon.
Here's a piece that's loose.
Victor Polyak and Yemeni Asmaram are part of a team of experts from the University of New Mexico. They both challenge the theory that the Grand Canyon is 6 million years old. Their evidence, a revolutionary new dating technique.
Well, we found out very soon in our project that the caves contained formations, they're called speleothems, that form close to water tables. And so we were excited about that because if we could date those materials, then we could position a water table at any place in the canyon at any time.
Speleothems are rock deposits created by water, much like stalactites. This is Snowball Palace. By dating the speleothems here, scientists have suggested an older origin for the nearby western Grand Canyon.
Caves are the best archives you can think of as having well-preserved environments in which you can have ideally suitable materials for dating.
Millions of years ago, these caves were beneath the ancient river. As the water level dropped in the canyon, the water table also declined. Eventually, it drained out of the caves, creating the speleothems. The New Mexico team dates the canyon at 11 million years older than geologists ever suspected, making the Grand Canyon not 6, but 17 million years old. "50 miles upriver, it's a different story. Geologist Ryan Crow specializes in volcanic rocks in the eastern Grand Canyon. He's uncovered evidence that's surprising to his colleagues.
There's a fair amount of evidence that Native Americans here interacted with the lava flows. They're as young as 1,000 years old. An archaeological survey found pieces of pottery shards in a basalt flow.
Man-made objects found encased in the volcanic rocks confirms that much of the rock here is far younger than geologists suspected. Volcanism began not millions of years ago, but hundreds of thousands, and continued right up until the near present, sometimes with catastrophic results. Basalt flows are slow-moving rivers of lava that harden into black rock. In Hawaii, basalt lava constantly flows into the ocean, where it solidifies and expands the shoreline. At the Grand Canyon, the basalt cascaded down to the riverbed. These lava flows would eventually cause a massive burst of erosive force, changing the shape of the canyon almost overnight. But how? One clue still clings to the canyon wall.
Right over here is a chunk of basalt, a piece of one of these lava flows that's stuck onto the canyon walls, and it's quite high above the river level, filling the canyon with 300 meters or 900 feet of basaltic material, effectively clogging it.
Here at Toro Wheat Point, we can see exactly what this clogging created. This is where two basalt cascades met, creating the Grand Canyon's highest lava dam. Over thousands of years, these cascades blocked the Grand Canyon, holding back more water than Hoover Dam. But when the lava dam broke down, the result was disaster.
As it failed, that entire volume of water would have just gushed in the canyon, and it would have just been a torrent of chaotic flow, and like the biggest rapid you could imagine.
Such a catastrophic dam burst would have carried away much of the volcanic rock and likely caused more erosion in a few days than the modern Colorado River does in years. This sudden reshaping of the upper Eastern Canyon starkly contrasts with the very gradual erosion found in the caves of the Western Canyon downstream. With this new theory, scientists believe the Grand Canyon is both younger and older than previously thought. At the Grand Canyon, scientific explanations and human stories converge. The Hopi origin story could be a way of explaining their migration down the Colorado River in ancient times. Such a journey is likely to be just one of a series of migrations undertaken by Native American peoples before written history. And several other traditions tell stories that may record real events that happened 800 miles further north, at the other end of the Rockies.
The events that created the Scablands were very dramatic events. And I think in part, this helps to explain why stories would endure.
During the creation of the channeled Scablands, vast flooding pushed its inhabitants out. Were its only witnesses able to escape? Mysterious forces shaped the American West, including the channeled Scablands of Washington State. Vic Baker has traveled their length and width, searching for answers. He's investigated massive boulders miles from their points of origin, deep potholes in valley floors, and monumental dry falls. These features appear to be evidence of massive flooding. If this theory is correct, it validates long overlooked oral traditions that seem to date back to the last ice age.
During what's termed the last ice age, one community says that its ancestors survived by taking refuge on a mountaintop as these floods came down toward them.
More than 250 miles east of Dry Falls is Missoula. Here, 16,000 years ago, the edge of the North American ice sheet existed. As the world began to warm, huge lakes formed within and behind it. One of these was Glacial Lake Missoula, a vast body of water held back by an ice wall 2,000 feet high. Taller than the Empire State Building. Could the failure of this ice dam have created the flood? The answer lies on the very edge of the Columbia River in Washington State. Geologists are able to distinguish what these small hills are with aerial photography. They show ripples identical to those made by water flowing over sand on the seashore.
In science, particularly geology, we sometimes liken it to a detective story. Well, if there was anything in the Scabland detective story that corresponds to the smoking gun, it was these giant current ripples, because no one would doubt that these were the product of a giant flow of water. And given all the other evidence for that flow, that sort of cemented the story.
The enormous floodwaters released by Glacial Lake Missoula could have done this. Geologists at the University of Southampton create a simulation of how the ice dam at Lake Missoula failed. They place a thick ice dam between two blocks representing hills. Turning on the flume, the pressure behind the dam builds. In a real ice dam, the pressure is so great that water trapped within its base can't freeze. Instead, this super pressurized water forces its way through the ice, creating a honeycomb of microscopic tunnels that grow into bigger fissures. Then, suddenly, the dam breaks. At Glacial Lake Missoula, this released 500 cubic miles of water.
When the ice dam actually failed and the flood surged across the landscape, it could have all occurred in just a few days. The water surged right across North America to Portland in Oregon and then into the Pacific Ocean.
Flowing at speeds of up to 65 miles per hour, the immense power of the flood creates underwater tornadoes.
The floodwater is moving so fast, it forms eddies that are so powerful because they reduce the pressure. They're able to lift the rocks out of the ground. You might remember the scene in The Wizard of Oz where Dorothy's house is lifted up by a tornado. This is the same kind of process, except it was in moving water instead of in air.
Within these swirling vortices, bubbles form and implode, producing enough destructive force to carve through rock and create these potholes. This process is called cavitation.
The power of this is so great it can actually pit steel. So basically any rock will be eroded by this process.
As the flood plunged southwest, it gouged out valley floors and washed boulder-sized debris miles downriver. Eventually, it struck the cliffs now called Dry Falls, creating the most dramatic sight of all.
The water flowing over the top of this was actually deeper than the heights of the cliffs. It was only later when the water dropped that this actually became a waterfall.
The flood would have been a disaster for anyone living downstream. Ancient stories suggest the sudden disappearance of Glacial Lake Missoula also ruined the livelihoods of tribal people living on its shores.
A story told among the Shoshones is that there were a group of people known as People of the Moon who resided on these shores. And they, all of a sudden, one day witnessed these waters beginning to recede. Now, for an entire inland sea to disappear before your very eyes, that would be remembered. And the people who lived on that shore saw those events, had an entire life built living on that shore, they would remember that.
It may even be possible that the mega flooding of the Scablands was remembered because it happened more than once.
There were also a large number of smaller floods, which if we had today, they would be considered spectacular.
These massive floods took place at the end of the last ice age and before written history. Long dismissed as myth, catastrophic floods in the Scablands and elsewhere have played a key role in shaping the landscape of the West. And such megafloods may also have created many of the features on Mars. Striking parallels between Earth and the Red Planet have recently been uncovered. And these very similarities have sparked new and alarming questions about the future of our Earth. The West has played a defining role in shaping the American psyche since the first inhabitants arrived here thousands of years ago.
I have ancestors who came from Asia in deep, deep time. I also have ancestors who got on ships and came across the ocean to North America in more recent time. And I need all of these stories to explain my world.
Explaining the sites around Monument Valley proved a major challenge for the first white settlers in the 19th century.
One of the most touching things on the Overland Trail as people come into this region is the effort on the part of many diarists to see the landscape in terms of human structures and physical buildings. So people are just full of ideas. Oh, this looks like the Acropolis, or this just reminds me of the courthouse at home. Well, I don't really know that it looks like the courthouse at home, but it's a wonderful effort to try to take something so unfamiliar and put the familiar courthouse at home into play to make it seem less alien and less other.
Monument Valley is one of the most iconic locations in the history of Western movies. It's a place of open spaces that defines the idea of the frontier.
For a lot of people, there is our conviction that the human race, maybe especially the American variety of the human race, needs to have that territory beyond, needs to have the place where it's just open territory.
Studying the landscape around Monument Valley may provide answers to our own destiny. It began forming 290 million years ago, when ancient rivers poured into what was then a basin area. Over millions of years, climate change, flooding, weather, and erosion have created its unique gravity-defying landscape. Today, these iconic Western landscapes are even being found on a new frontier. One where scientists are discovering not only how the West was made, but how it may end. Professor Marjorie Chan is one of the world's foremost experts on the landscape of Mars.
The West is really a lot like Mars. One of the important things is the fact that we have these fantastic exposures, and there's not a lot of vegetation covering up some of the features that we want to see.
Like Vic Baker's work in the channeled Scablands, Chan hopes to prove that Mars once possessed water. Her work also raises disturbing questions about what happened to the water on Mars and what that might mean for the future of the Earth. Chan's exploring the area around Monument Valley. Her specialty is a mineral called hematite.
Pipes are one of the more unusual forms, but one of the more common forms are these nice spherical balls. They look much like marbles and typically accumulate in low areas where they litter the landscape in thousands.
The formation of these marbles is one of nature's most miraculous processes. As water permeates the rock, the iron gradually separates from it.
One of the keys is the iron minerals here, and where they're spaced out, they can only form in one way, and that's with the presence of underground water percolating through the rock. And in fact, the mineral hematite generally only forms in the presence of water.
Chan proposed that the discovery of hematite pipes and balls on Mars could prove that water must have once flowed there, just as it did in Monument Valley. Initially, her ideas were treated with skepticism. Then, in January 2004, NASA's Mars rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, touched down on the Red Planet after a journey of nearly a year. One of the first things they found was small marble-like balls of hematite.
When those pictures came back, we were really excited, startled. It's just really hard to explain all the emotions that we were going through. But how many times in your life do you ever get the chance to have some kind of a prediction to say, I think this might be happening on Mars, and then to have the pictures immediately come back to confirm your ideas?
The hematite was convincing evidence that Mars must once have been abundant with water. And with water comes the promise of life.
Maybe the life is fairly primitive, like bacteria, but we do know that certain kinds of bacteria really interact well with minerals like iron. And maybe what we really need to do is get some samples back. That might really tell us for sure whether there is life.
Launched in 2007, NASA's Phoenix lander has been exploring the Martian surface for signs of life. If life did exist on Mars, what happened to it? The answer may lie here at Monument Valley. These unique features are the result of a lack of tectonic drift. This landscape has remained almost static and unmoving for millions of years. The strikingly similar and apparently lifeless landscape of Mars has no plate tectonics at all. If the Earth's continental plates halt, will our planet turn into a new Mars? The land on Earth was once a single continent, and new scientific models suggest the continents are drifting back together again. This might be exactly how a planet like Earth could turn into a dead planet like Mars. Viewed from a time machine, we can see one future scenario for how this might change the face of the American West. Over millions of years, the island of Alcatraz becomes the hill of Alcatraz as the San Francisco Bay dries out. The Great Red Rock Canyons wear away to featureless plains. "250 million years from now, our once familiar continents all but vanish, merging into one landmass. Monument Valley now becomes the norm. And with every passing year, life becomes less diverse and more scarce. Much of the Earth now closely resembles the eroded and seemingly dead surface of Mars. But one day in the distant future, if this scenario is correct, the Earth's tectonic plates will start moving again. Water will return to places like the dry falls, bringing with it rich and diverse life. And once again, the battle between gradual change and sudden catastrophe will resume to renew the Earth.